Hello boys, welcome back to another session of video tutorials, and this session is meant for class 12th biology students, and this is for 10th December 2020. And in this session, as we all know, we are revising chapter number 15, Biodiversity and Conservation. As part of it, we have been reflecting upon what is biodiversity, what are the various forms of biodiversity, and graphically how to represent species area relationship as proposed by Alexander van Humboldt. And also we learned lots of the biodiversity and importance of species diversity in an ecosystem or to an ecosystem. In that, not to forget, rivet popper hypothesis proposed by Paul Ehrlich is to be remembered. And then causes for biodiversity losses. We have been discussing the evil quartet, that is habitat loss and fragmentation. First evil, second evil, over exploitation, third evil, alien species invasion, and fourth, co-extinction. These are the four evil quartets that are responsible for biodiversity losses. And basically, biodiversity is to be conserved for three reasons. That is narrowly utilitarian, broadly utilitarian, and ethically utilitarian. Now, how to conserve the biodiversity? We all know the importance of biodiversity. What happens if we don't conserve biodiversity? What is the price that we have to pay for that? So, having known the importance of biodiversity, and having predicted the irreversible, irreparable losses, I think there is a need for all of us to conserve biodiversity. How to conserve it? So basically, the whole ecosystem is, when it is to be conserved, all its biodiversity is also protected. There are two ways of conservation of biodiversity. As all of you know, it is in situ. First one is in situ conservation, on-site conservation, and second one is ex situ, off-site conservation. So in situ conservation, conservationists have identified for maximum protection certain biodiversity hotspot regions with very high levels of species richness and high degree of endemism. Species found in that region and not found anywhere else. There are 34 biodiversity hotspots in the world. 34 biodiversity hotspots in the world. These hotspots are also regions of accelerated habitat loss. And we are proud to have 14 biosphere reserves, 90 national parks, and 448 wildlife sanctuaries. So these are the ways that we can conserve the biodiversity. So basically, on-site or in situ is conservation and protection of whole ecosystem and its biodiversity at all levels in order to protect the endangered species or threatened species. Two methods are being used to save biodiversity hotspots and protected areas. Biodiversity hotspots, as you all know, are the areas characterized by very high levels of species richness, high degree of endemism, and also accelerated habitat loss. Ecologically, hotspots are determined by four factors. That is, 1. Number of species diversity. Second, degree of endemism. Third, degree of threat to habitat due to its degradation and fragmentation. And fourth, degree of exploitation. So in the protected areas, like we are talking about the national parks, sanctuaries like bird sanctuaries, Ranganthittu, biosphere reserves, and then sacred forests and lakes, you call it a sacred groves. So the national parks are large areas meant for protection of flora and fauna, both animals and plants, and are maintained by the governments, and for it is maintained basically for scientific, educational and recreational purposes. They are not usually used for commercial extraction of resources. These are national parks, like you got Nehru National Park, Nehru Zoological Parks, and then sanctuaries are tracts of land with or without lake where wild animals and fauna can take refuge without being hunted. Like I said, bird sanctuaries in Ranganthittu near Mysore. Biosphere reserves are multi-purpose protected areas which are meant for preserving genetic diversity in representative ecosystems of various natural biomes and unique biological communities. Then, sacred forests and lakes or sacred groves are forest patches around places of worship which are held in high esteem by tribal communities, like in Karnataka, Maharashtra, Rajasthan. In all these states, you got sacred groves. And then the second one is of ex situ conservation. In this method, threatened animals and plants, means the almost endangered animals and plants, are taken out from their natural habitat. Look at that, taken out from their natural habitat and placed in special setting where they will be protected and given special care. Zoological parks, botanical gardens, wildlife safari parks are used for this purpose. Now, the gametes of threatened species, this is gametes of threatened species, can be preserved in viable and fertile condition for long periods of time using, of course, cryopreservation technique. This is one of the techniques which is becoming very, very valuable nowadays. We can preserve the seeds, we can preserve the gametes, we can preserve even the zygotes. So cryopreservation, that is storing something valuable at low temperatures. Eggs can be fertilized in vitro and plants can be propagated using tissue culture methods. And of course, not to forget our nanotechnology. So basically, ex situ, ex off-site, ex situ, it is the conservation of threatened plants and animals outside their natural habitats. These include off-site collections and, of course, very, very important, gene banks. Just like we have got State Bank of India, like that we have got gene banks. Off-site collections are live collections of wild and domesticated species in botanical gardens, zoological parks, wildlife safaris, and arboretia. That is, in all these off-site collection can be done. And gene banks are institutes that maintain stocks of viable seeds, like you've got seed banks, live growing plants, orchards, tissue culture, frozen germplasm with the whole range of genetic variability. So international efforts for conserving biodiversity through Earth Summit at Rio de Janeiro in 1992 at Brazil promoted Convention on Biological Diversity. It is called CBD, Convention on Biological Diversity, which was signed by 152 nations in the world, and its recommendations came into effect on 29th December 1993. India became a part of signatory to this Convention on Biological Diversity in May 1994. A second World Summit was held in 2002 in Johannesburg, South Africa, and this time positively 190 countries attending the summit pledged to significantly reduce the current rate of biodiversity loss at global, regional and local levels by the year 2010. But already we are in 2020. Are we achieving the promises that we made? I still doubt. So there is need to do it with a lot of honesty. And you got something called a red data book. The International Union of Conservation of Nature and Natural Resources, that is what we abbreviated as IUCN, International Union of Conservation of Nature and Natural Resources, which is now called as WCU, World Conservation Union, WCU, World Conservation Union. As all of you know, it maintains a red data book. Okay, red data book. This is important. This red book is important. So this red data book will have a red list, which is a catalog of taxa facing risk of extinction. So the red list categories are, first one is the extinct. That means the taxa has been completely eliminated or died and it is out of the earth. Like example, dodo. Critically endangered, second one, this taxon is facing very high risk of extinction in the wild and can become extinct at any moment in the immediate future. Example, pygmy hog. And third, vulnerable. Presently the population is sufficient but is undergoing depletion due to some factor or factors, so that it is facing risk of extinction in medium term future. Example, clouded leopard. And then we have got extinct in wild. The taxon is absent in any of its natural or expected habitats in the wild. And then of course, very familiar one, endangered. It is facing a high risk of extinction in the wild in the near future due to decrease in its habitat, excessive predation, and of course, unfortunately, poaching. Example, lion-tailed macaque. And then lower risk. They are threatened species which have lower risk of extinction and therefore require only small attention to become normal, flourishing species in future. And then we have got something called data deficient. The data for making direct or indirect assessment of risk of extinction is deficient, not available fully. Rare species. They are species with naturally small populations, either localized or thinly scattered, which are always at risk from pests, pathogens, predators, and exotic species. And then not evaluated. The taxon has not been evaluated for risk of extinction. And last, indeterminate species. The species are in danger of extinction, but the reason is not known, is an unknown reason. So this is how we have a flow chart of various red list categories in the red data book maintained by IUCN or latest WCU, World Conservation Union. So this book list gives us how dangerous our biodiversity is there. So it is our responsibility, not only we biology students, it is the responsibility of every citizen, every person, every human being in the world to be humane so that all species will flourish, biodiversity will be there. I think with this we have completed a revision of entire 12th class also. From tomorrow onwards we'll go for the tests, particularly assertion and reasoning tests. So prepare well. I'll give some